It's been a few days since we started our trip with my father's friends to the city of Xyrus. On the way, Art found a pond where he could take a bath, and while his mother was bathing him, he thought to himself, "My birthday has passed too." On the same birthday, Jasmine Flamesworth held out a dagger to the boy and hesitantly said a birthday present and a lesson. At the same time, while Arthur was being bathed by Alice, the other men were having as much fun as they could, one of them being the redhead who was the first to dive into the pond from the cliff. Continuing his thoughts while the rest of the people were playing in the river, Art mentally promoted Adam, Helen, and my father continued their studies with decent progress until now. I was surprised that Jasmine had already managed to master several of my fencing techniques in a short period of time. I'm still amazed that Jasmine was able to understand my instructions so quickly, especially when learning the feint step. Continuing to play after everyone had already started to leave the pond, Ray decided to steal things and run around with them playing catch-up. When the games were over and everyone had gathered, the final stages began. While the girls dried their hair with the help of wind magic and the men checked the condition of the animals pulling the carts. Having finished with the preparations, Alice looked at her son and happily told Art, "Let's hurry up, we'll be leaving soon." When the boy heard the message from his mother, he smiled slyly and said, "Okay, Mom, I'm coming right now." A few minutes later, the entire group set out again on the road to the town of Xyrus. Being in the same wheelchair with Arthur, the red-haired man looked back and said, "I still remember how your father got us into all kinds of trouble." In response to these words of her friend, Helen Shara, who was on the roof of the trolley, said, "I'm sure that Ray wasn't the only one who caused trouble." In response to his friend's question, the man awkwardly replied that it was not important, just a small rodent hair. At the same time, noticing some strange, unhealthy appearance of the forest, Arthur asked in confusion, "Hey, are you okay, Mom?" In response to her son's worried question, the girl happily answered, covering her face with her hand, "I'm just a little tired, dear, I'm fine." When he heard that everything was fine, he could not, of course, simply accept that his mother was not feeling well, but he could not insist on anything either, so he continued to study the book. After convincing himself that his mother was fine, Art continued to read the book and felt a stare that was focused on him and did not let him rest, making him afraid. Continuing to feel the oppressive atmosphere from Jasmine Flamesworth, who was spying on him, the boy heard "Teach me more." Trying to ignore the girl and continue reading the book, Art suddenly felt the wheelchair start to shake violently. Not understanding the reasons for this incident, Alice looked at the driver and asked what was going on. In response to the girl's question, Helen Shara nervously told everyone to get ready for the bandits to attack us. Hearing the warning of danger, the wind mage began to recite a spell, saying, "Obey the wind and follow my will, save and protect." At the same time, feeling that they were being attacked by enemies, Alice clung to her son to shield him from danger with her own body. The next moment, the first wave of the enemy's attack was repelled, and all the arrows fired at them were swept away by the wind whirlwind conjured by the golden-haired girl. As soon as this was completed, Jasmine Flamesworth stepped down from the wheelchair and prepared to fight the attackers who decided to prevent them from completing their journey in peace. At the same time, Art's father Reynold used the magic of his own body to catch one of the arrows with his hand and firmly squeezed it in half. Also prepared to fight the enemies was Durden Walker, who was driving one of the carts, expressing his displeasure by grabbing his staff and clutching it tightly in his hand. At the same time, Helen Shara, who was on the roof of one of the carts, dodged almost all the arrows and took out her bow for the battle. Taking out one of her arrows from behind her back, she pulled the bowstring and began to aim at the enemies to remove the threat. At the same time, being in the wheelchair with his mother, Art was confused in his head. Realizing the situation they were in, the guy added in his head, "We are completely surrounded on all sides." However, despite the combat readiness of the group of travelers, the enemy was much more numerous, with a considerable number of archers on the rocks waiting for the right opportunity to attack. There were also bandits who were hiding in the grass to jump out when the archers were completely engrossed in the battle. The next moment, another man appeared on the battlefield, smiled slyly, and told the boys what a great catch he had made. Dropping his axe upon arriving at his place, the bandit leader added, "Leave only the women and the child alive and try not to leave any scars. They will pay much less for the damaged goods." Hearing the words of the bandit leader, Arthur mentally muttered, "I think I've been living in a bubble for too long." Looking at the enemies who were slowly approaching them, the boy added in his head, "I had almost forgotten that every world has its share of dirt like this one." Feeling some fear and hatred for the enemies who attacked them, the boy mentally added the damaged goods. Realizing that there would be a fight, the boy immediately grabbed his weapon. But he was again interrupted by his mother, who grabbed him and hugged him tightly. Trying to calm her son down, Alice, who was more frightened than anyone else, said, "Don't worry, I'm here." At the same time, one of the archers standing on the mountain fired an arrow at the cart. Continuing the battle with the enemies, Durden Walker, working as a team with Reynolds, shouted out to gather and guard. Immediately after his words, he used a magic spell and a loud crack of earth was heard near the trolleys. The next moment, an earthen wall appeared in front of their carts, shielding them from the archers' attacks. But despite this, some archers' attacks could still hit, so one arrow flew directly in the direction of Alice and Art. At the last moment, the airbender appeared in front of a couple of her comrades and used a spell to repel the danger that was approaching them. Even so, the leader of the bandits and his men were already approaching the group of travelers, having climbed over the earthen wall. At the same time, Helen, sitting on one of the boulders that appeared from the ground, pulled on her bowstring and shot arrows at the approaching enemies. At one point, a couple of approaching enemies were eliminated, but the leader himself was able to repel all attacks directed at him. While his comrade continued to deal with another bandit, Reynolds, having deflected an arrow, rushed off the battlefield. The next moment, he was behind the archers who were causing too much trouble by landing on one of them. As soon as the first enemy was destroyed, he quickly moved across the battlefield and eliminated a couple more enemies. Holding one enemy under his arm and finishing off another, Ray did not realize that danger was already lurking behind him in the form of a bandit who swung his sword to finish him off. However, he was lucky enough to have an arrow fired at the right moment, piercing the enemy through and through, eliminating him and removing the threat. And then Ray looked around and realized that an attempt was being made on his life. Immediately afterwards, he looked back in the direction of his rescuer and nodded his head to express his gratitude for the rescue, and received a nod in return. At the same time, on the other side of the battlefield, Jasmine Flamesworth was waging her battle, swinging her swords and slashing her enemies left and right. It was not an easy battle for the red-haired boy who wielded a spear either. This time, he faced a large enemy whose attack he barely managed to dodge. Continuing to destroy enemies one by one, Jasmine Flamesworth approaching the enemies made them despair and lose all hope. Only this time, everything changed when an enemy appeared on the battlefield with a whip behind the bandit who had already said goodbye to his life. At one point, he swung his weapon and cut off his comrade's legs, but he was unlucky to hit the girl, who managed to retreat back. Continuing to push, swinging a long rope, the man shouted, "Stop resisting, baby! I'll make sure you get a good lesson and then you'll be begging to stay with me." After approaching a few meters, the man began to swing the whip again, but Jasmine managed to dodge his attacks, stepping back and still receiving minor injuries. At the same time, watching the battlefield between the bandit and the girl, Arthur, sitting in the wheelchair, thought to himself, "She's at a disadvantage against the enemy, but what I can do to help the fighter is one thing." Thinking about what would happen if he had to fight against his enemies, the boy put his hand to his chin and added, "But I wonder if I can stand up to a grown man with this body." The next moment, his thoughts were interrupted by someone arriving at their wheelchair. It was the father, who had broken the wheelchair in an awkward fall. After a hard landing, the man even had a trail of flying behind him, but despite the damage, he was still conscious and had some ability to get to his feet. At that very moment, when Alice saw that Reynold was badly injured in the battle, she screamed out to her beloved. But there was no time for consolation and panic, because the next moment, the leader of the bandits appeared in front of Art's eyes and did this to his father. Realizing that the situation was critical and his father was not in the best position, Arthur exclaimed, "Mom, you have to cure Dad!" And at that time, the girl was trembling with fear. Watching his mother's behavior, he saw something strange and said in his head something was wrong with his mother and why she did not heal his father. At the same moment, Alice said, "But I can't." Trying to somehow reassure his beloved Reynold, smiling through the pain, he said, "I'm fine, my dear. My wounds are not fatal. Don't worry and do your best." Immediately after giving his instructions to his wife, the man turned his gaze to his son and said, "Art, now listen to me carefully." Looking at his son with a stern look, he added, "After your mother uses the healing spell, these bad people will follow her. I can fight off the leader, but I won't have time to worry about protecting you. Take your mother back down the path we came from and don't stop." When Arthur heard his father's instructions to flee immediately, he put his hand to his heart and said, "What are you talking about, Dad? I'm not going to leave you. I can fight. You saw me." In response to the objections of his rank, the man leaned his head against him and said, "Listen to me, Arthur Levin. I know you can fight. That's why I trust you to protect your mother." Immediately after these words, after a short pause, Reynolds added heavily and also protected the child inside her. Hearing this, Art immediately began to recall the moments when his father touched his wife's tummy at different times. He also immediately recalled the moment when his mother was a little nauseous, but told him that she was fine and just a little tired. Realizing that he simply did not perceive all those signs due to the lack of information, the boy mentally said that my mother was pregnant, and then felt his father's hand on his head. Continuing to instruct his brave son, he added, "I was going to tell you about it when we get to Xyrus, but..." Immediately after his father's words, grabbing his hand and squeezing it tightly, Arthur said confidently, "I will protect my mother." As Alice was finishing the healing spell, Reynolds said to his son, "Get ready, Arthur." Wiping the blood from his face and lips, the man added that there were 4 wizards on their side. At the same time, seeing that the girl was treating one of the travelers, the leader of the bandits shouted to his comrades that they had a healer, so don't let them escape. Soon as Alice finished healing her husband, Art grabbed her hand and ran in the opposite direction of the path, calling out, "Come on, Mom!" Retreating from the battlefield with his mother, the boy looked back and said in his head, "Don't die, Dad, please." Creating a corridor for retreat, the red-haired man dealt with a group of enemies and waved his hand, saying, "Come on, let's go faster." Continuing to walk away from the battlefield, Arthur did not even realize that they were being chased by one of the enemies who had just made a breakthrough and would catch up with them in a couple of seconds. Seeing this at the right time, the red-haired man they had just passed took the enemy on, shouting, "I'll hold him off, and you guys run away." When there were no more enemies on their way, Art continued to follow his father's instructions at a rapid pace, but they still had trouble. Behind him, one of the enemy archers, observing the moving targets, prepared to fire his bow, pulling the tetevy. Sensing the danger behind him, Art let go of his mother's hand and stopped behind to deflect the enemy's arrow with his wooden sword. Only his wooden sword broke in half after the first shot, and his arrow was deflected and failed to hit the target. At the same moment, reaching for the next arrow behind his back, the man said in confusion what the hell had happened. The next moment, after taking out the enemy who was threatening them, Helen Shara exclaimed, "Don't stop, Arthur." After the next obstacle on their way was removed, Art was able to continue his retreat, but some feelings did not leave him. Recalling the group of bandits who stood near their leader, the boy mentally said something was definitely wrong here. Recalling his father's words while his comrades were dealing with the remains of the bandits, he mentally added that there must be 4 wizards. Paying attention to the red-haired man who was fighting with his opponent, he started counting by saying 1 in his head. The next moment, he looked over at his father who was fighting against the gang leader, and added 2 in his head. Continuing to look for more mages with his eyes, he added 3, and then where is the last one? After which the leader of the enemies shouted, "Forget about the plan, Demon. Finish them off." After he heard this exclamation addressed to someone unknown, the boy suddenly thought about who he had just talked to. The next moment, as he started to turn his head in different directions, he noticed that the 4th wizard who cast the whirlpool was at the game not far from them. When the magical attack was launched at them, Art assessed the situation and said in his head, "Even if I can dodge it using mana, my mom won't have time." Unwilling to accept this development, the boy gritted his teeth and said in his head, "Oh shit, why is this happening?" Choosing the best course of action, he pushed Alice out of the way of the magic attack and said in his head, "I'm sorry for this, Mom." Having pushed Alice out of the area of the magical attack, Art used magic and said in his head, "I know it may not work, but I still want to destroy the magician." The next moment, he took out his knife which he had received for his birthday and tied a thread of mana to it and threw it toward the enemy. A few seconds after the throw, it perfectly accomplished its mission by wrapping the enemy's leg in 2 turns and sticking into his flesh. Immediately after the hit, Art, who was thrown off the cliff by the water attack, pulled the man down with him using a magical thread of mana. Heading down the cliff and dragging another enemy with him, the boy said in his head, "I hope this string of mana will hold." Pulling the enemy with him, Art stopped in one place, hanging in the air, and the reason for this was that the mage grabbed the edge of the rock. But it was only for a short time. Trying to hold on to the edge, the rock began to crack and collapse. The next moment, it shattered right in the man's hand, and he and the boy flew down the cliff. After seeing what had just happened to his friend's son, Durden Walker made every effort to save the boy. Using his earth control magic, he created a giant earth arm that followed him in an attempt to intercept the boy. But it all happened very quickly, and no one had time to do anything to prevent him from falling. At that very moment, Art saw only a large hand hanging from the cliff above him. As he continued to fall from the cliff, the boy shed a tear and spread his arms, thinking that everyone else would be okay instead of fearing the inevitable. Immediately after these thoughts, closing his eyes and gritting his teeth, the boy sadly muttered in his head, "Oh man, I always wanted to be an older brother so badly." The next moment, he began to remember his past life, where he woke up in his spacious room with no one else around. His sleep was interrupted by a knock at the door. He got up from his bed and went to the door, and opening the entrance to his room, saw a maid holding a bowl. As he walked down the corridor past all his subjects, he heard the greeting of "Good morning, King Gray" repeated over and over again. So he passed all his subjects and went down the corridor to the room of the man he wanted to talk to. After a while, entering without knocking, the king drew the attention of an old man who was sitting at a table and sorting through papers, and then raising his head, he said in surprise, "King Gray." When he did not receive any response, the old man noticed that he began to look at the paintings on the walls and decided to wait in silence. Looking at the painting, which depicted several key historical figures, the king mentally thought of the council that actually ran the country, guided its politics and economy. The next moment, moving on to a picture of the king himself, he mentally added that in a world full of problems such as declining birth rates and limited resources, wars were replaced by duels and armies of kings. And it was I who was with him, continuing to watch the king silently looking at the paintings, that the advisor said, "I see you admire your own work, don't you?" Rising from his seat and heading toward King Gray, the old man added, "While it is useful to be on the council, I will not lie and say that I do not envy the fame and glory you kings receive after your victories." Smiling happily at his king, he added, "But in any case, to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" After receiving a question from his advisor, the man reached for the medallion around his neck and then took it off. Finally, having made his firm decision, he laid it on the elder's desk, thereby resigning his position. After this action, King Gray left the room and said, "I'm leaving Marlin," and was told to hold on by Gray. Arriving back in his room, the man put his hand to his forehead and thought, "I spent my whole life being the strongest." Continuing his thoughts, he added in his head, "And what was all the fame for? I was still an orphan, and everyone I cared about was gone." Thinking back to that very moment when he and his father's friends were sitting around the campfire enjoying a meal, the boy added in his head, "I would give up everything I had in this life for the chance to go back to Ashbur and see them again." Sometime after he finished his thoughts, the guy came to after falling off a cliff and wondered where I was. Slowly opening his eyes after regaining consciousness, the guy added in his head that how is it possible that I am still alive, damn? After lying down for a while to completely recover from the feeling of dizziness, the boy wiped his eyes and looked up at the sky, tilted his head to the side and saw the same sorcerer he had dragged along with him, only to be unable to survive. Feeling disgusted by what he saw, Art felt nauseous the next moment, and the sounds of the inner world becoming the outer world could be heard throughout the forest. After unpleasant feelings of vomiting, the guy closed his eyes again and fell asleep. After lying there for some time, a leaf from a tree that landed on his face made him wake up, and then to remove it from his face, he turned his head to the side and saw a bag of berries that had come off the bandits' equipment. Realizing that this might be the only food available to him now, he began to crawl through the pain and strength to the pieces of meat and berries scattered on the ground. With difficulty, Art picked up each of them and pulled them to him, and gathered several pieces to satisfy his hunger. When he finished gathering the supplies, the boy began to stuff himself with them, and then washed it all down with water. After having a small snack, the boy rolled over on his back and threw the flask of water out of his hands. After filling his stomach with food, he mentally mumbled his thanks for the food and closed his eyes again and fell asleep, regaining his strength. Thus, some more time passed, and the next time he woke up, he realized that he had to do something and began to slowly get to his feet with trembling. After making a lot of effort to get to his feet, Art managed to do so by leaning on his leg to keep himself upright and moaning heavily. When Arthur felt that he could stand, he slowly walked to the motionless body of the wizard who had fallen from the cliff with him, then grabbed his knife and pulled it out of the bandit's leg. After packing all the things for the trip, the guy looked up to assess the scale of the fall and said in amazement in his head that it turns out I changed to experience this. Breaking off a piece of a dry branch from a tree near him, the boy mentally wondered how much time had passed since I had fallen. Immediately afterwards, he added, "And where am I now, anyway, after idle thoughts?" And went forward to find out at least something, he added, "It doesn't matter, I have to move on." Starting his way to get out of this place, the unsuspecting boy suddenly heard someone's voice, which exhaled in surprise and said, "Wow, you're already awake." Hearing this voice, Art immediately hid behind a tree and began to look out from behind it at the body of the bandit lying nearby. As he continued to watch the wizard's motionless body, he said in his head, "Don't tell me what." Immediately after these thoughts, a strange voice asked, "So how is your body doing?" To which he added in his head, "I swear to God if it gets up." The next moment, approaching the man's body and stretching out a stick to him, Art, feeling a shiver throughout his body, begged him not to get up, and then heard a laugh at himself. Continuing to watch the boy, a strange voice added, "Don't worry, the corpse won't come back to life if you're so afraid of it." Arthur breathed out a sigh of relief when he heard this information. Just as he was about to relax, he suddenly realized something strange, and then, looking back at himself, he mentally said, "Wait, but don't trust this unknown voice, no matter how silky smooth and dignified it sounds." Starting to swing his knife and then pointing it in the direction where Arthur's voice was coming from, he shouted out, "Who are you? You are the one who saved me." After these loud statements, a rabbit jumped out of the bushes where the horse thought the owner of the voice was hiding and went further into the forest, hiding in the thick of the foliage and bushes. The next moment, seeing the boy's actions, a strange voice answered, "Yes, that's your second question, and you'll know the first one as soon as you arrive at my place." In response to the words of the mysterious voice that spoke to him, Art replied with displeasure, "You speak with confidence, thinking that I will try to find you." After the guy's self-confident words, a mysterious voice added, "I am the only one who can bring you home from this place." Hearing the only motivation to move on from the strange voice, the boy, remembering his parents, said in his head, "Right home to Ray Alice and also the Horns twins." He also remembered his mother, who vomited during the trip due to the early stages of pregnancy, and said to his family. Arthur froze in his tracks after a bunch of thoughts suddenly came to him, and he thought to himself, "They're definitely okay. They made it to Xyrus safely." Immediately after his own reflection, realizing that he had set the wrong tone for the conversation, the boy said in his head, "Mr. Voice, I can disturb you so that you can grace me with your presence." In response to the boy's question, the mysterious voice only laughed loudly. Immediately after he finished laughing, he added, "I see you're catching on quite quickly, Arthur Lavin. Although it's a bit rude of you to call a lady mister, but your feelings are there because of that." Hearing his name called by a mysterious voice in the forest, the boy nervously said in his head, "Wait, but how does she know my name?" Fulfilling Arthur Lewis's request for a gift of presents, the lady said, "Then I'll show you." After which the boy felt a severe headache that knocked him to the ground. Trying to somehow stay on his feet, the guy looked for a place to fall through the small spot of red color that surrounded him. The next moment, his eyes began to wander through the forest, moving farther and farther away until they reached a rock. After showing the boy where he needed to go to find this young lady, the mysterious voice added, "I recommend that you get on the road immediately. It will be much safer before it gets dark." Setting off after being shown where to go, Arthur mentally raced as my body condition improved step by step, leaving me with only a few injuries here and there during the day. I couldn't help but think. Breaking through the thicket with his knife and stick, the boy added in his head what magic she used, how she could have known we were falling, and why she saved only me. The more I tried to find an explanation for this, the more questions I started to have. And suddenly the boy heard a noise nearby that was quite familiar to him. Walking through the stones that blocked his view, the boy mentally said, "Please let it be as I think." When little Art saw the river lying in front of him, he threw off all his clothes and shouted, "Hooray for the water!" Unable to resist the temptation, he immediately jumped into the water, enjoying the refreshing feeling and the opportunity to wash off all the dirt. After he bathed in the pond, the boy began to wash his clothes, which had gotten dirty during the trip, whistling happily. Observing this situation, a lady with a mysterious voice said, How cute it is," and carefree Art immediately covered himself with the clothes he was holding. Seeing the guy's reaction to her sudden words, the girl said, "Don't worry, there's nothing to see," which struck him to the heart. After completing the water procedures, the boy dressed with a lowered self-esteem and disappointedly mumbled that it was just the words King Arthur must remain calm and unruffled. As Arthur walked further toward the rock, he heard a voice saying, "I'm sorry I hit you, don't sulk." To which Art replied, offended, "This body is just not developed yet, that's all." After these words, the boy took some water from the river in his flask and had a small snack before resuming his journey. Finishing a short break to restore his strength, he mentally said, "Well, by sunrise, I should be near the area of the elves." Keeping his gaze directed upward to see the direction of the mountain, he added in his mind, "But I don't see the fog that the Alshire Forest is known for." As Arthur continued through the woods on his way, my fears of traveling through the animal fields were mentally assuaged by the fact that only small animals were present. Continuing on his way, looking around the area, the guy added, "Although I'm surprised I haven't seen any manna beast since I came in, This place is mana rich. It's a shame I can't stay and absorb some of the mana because I have to hurry." Remembering his mother, whom he saved by sacrificing himself, Arthur mentally said, "I need to go back to my parents. My mother is pregnant. The stress of my potential death could endanger the baby inside her." Immediately after these words, the boy walked confidently to the rock where he was supposed to reach, adding in his head, of course, if they themselves survived the attack. Upon arriving at the place indicated by the lady with the mysterious voice, Arthur heard, "I'm very glad you were able to get here safely." When the boy heard these words from the girl, he touched the rock with his stick and said, "Well, it's very nice to meet you." In response to this greeting from the baby, the girl said, opening the passage inside, "No matter how interesting it is, I am not a reasonable pile of stones. You will find me in the gorge," after which he saw the place where he needed to go and said, "Oh, I see." As he approached the crevice in the rock, he looked inside and swallowed hard, then began to gather the courage to continue. Gathering his strength and taking the first step inside the cave, the boy said in his head, "Mom, Dad, wait for me. I have to go home soon." After the confident words, the guy began to slowly move inside the cave to find the owner of this mysterious voice. Suddenly, he heard her warning him to watch his step, but it was too late. Art had already stepped on a pebble that had lost its hold and fell down. Immediately after the pebble, the boy himself flew down without the possibility of turning back or grabbing something to avoid falling. The strangest thing about this situation was that he was falling on some bright light source that shone brightly, radiating mana. After a few seconds of good flying, the boy finally landed face down, which he was not very happy about as he got several bruises. Getting up from the ground and scratching his cheek where he had landed, Art mentally muttered a warning that I could save 2 floors down would be nice. After a short whimper about his bad luck and falling down, Arthur got to his feet and rubbing his pants went on. Suddenly he noticed something strange and frightening on his way, and then, feeling that he could not control his body from shock, he muttered in fright what it was. Falling to the ground and trying to crawl back somehow, he saw a large dark golem with horns, a large sword, and bright red eyes. At the same time, looking at the frightened child who exclaimed what it was, a familiar voice said, "We finally met, child." The stone golem of the girl got up from its seat and walked towards the boy, saying, "Bugs will fly into your mouth if you keep it open so wide." After saying his words, the terrible monster stretched his hand towards the boy, which scared him very much. Only at the last moment something strange happened. She stretched out her hand to him, offering to help him get up from the ground, which surprised him greatly. Taking hold of one finger of the giant creature, Art heard it say, "It will take me a while to open a spatial rift strong enough to take you home." After lifting the boy to his feet and leading him to the unusual plants, the girl added that there are special plants that can nourish us until then. When Art heard the offer of a meal from the golem girl, he bowed to the owner of the place and said, "Thank you very much." The next moment, with the girl's permission, he went to one of the plants and tried to tear off the fruit, thinking it looked normal. Picking up the fruit and looking at the reflection, the boy suddenly remembered his family, with whom he used to enjoy eating fruit. After the sudden immersion in memories, the boy closed his eyes and began shaking his head to get the stupid thoughts out of his head, when suddenly a golem appeared behind him and said, "This one tastes better." Having accidentally crushed a berry after being very frightened by the sudden appearance of a lady behind him, Art splashed with the juice and pulp of the berry said, "I see." After picking another berry, he moved a little further and sat down with a young lady nearby to enjoy a snack to restore his vitality. In the process of savoring, the boy decided to ask some questions and said, "I know you told me you were a lady, but is there a better way for me to address you?" To which she replied, "My name is Sylvia." After hearing the name of the person who had saved him from certain death, Arthur asked Sylvia, "Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" She replied, "Go ahead, boy, though I may not be able to answer all of them." Having been given permission to ask questions of the girl, Arthur, with his slowly fading fear of Sylvia's appearance, began to ask her all the questions that had been on his mind since he had woken up from his fall. Where was this place? Why was she here all alone? Where did she come from? How did she get this injury, and why did she save me? After listening to all the questions from the boy, Sylvia said, "Your first question is quite simple." Then, recalling where they were now, she added, "This place is a narrow zone that lies between the animal fields and the forest of Alshire, and no one knows about it because I have protected it from anyone who approached it, although such cases were very rare." Hearing this individual address him, the boy threw his arm around his neck and awkwardly said, "You can call me Art, please." Immediately after this request, hiding his gaze, he awkwardly added to Sylvia, "My family calls me Art, which is short for Arthur, Nothing special, really." When asked how to call him in the future, the girl thoughtfully said, "Very well, then I will also call you Art." After fulfilling the request for the boyfriend's name, the girl said, "Now, as for your second question, I am here alone only because I have no one else to be with." Raising her head up and looking at the ceiling, she added thoughtfully, "I have many enemies who desperately want what I have." Continuing to answer the questions posed by Art, she pointed to her wound and said, "In my last battle with the enemies, before I could escape, I was wounded." Having answered most of their questions, the girl said thoughtfully, "And now, as for why I saved you." Rising to her feet and looking at the guy next to her, Sylvia said, "Maybe I was moved by your courage and sacrifice, or maybe I just felt lonely, and I don't really know why." After discussing everything that interested the boy, the girl went to her throne and then took a seat on it, adding, "I'm sorry, Art, but it's been a night. My wound is festering. I need to be in good condition when I work on the spatial rift tomorrow." After receiving an apology and some messages about the next day, Art smiled happily and said, "Oh, I understand. Then I wish you good dreams." After Sylvia fell asleep, he said mentally, when the scary figure dressed in dark armor left, "I couldn't help but think how lonely she looked." He was just about to leave to find a place to sleep when he suddenly heard Sylvia's voice, who opened her eyes and said, "Oh, by the way, there's something else I wanted to tell you." Continuing to look at the guy who hadn't gotten far from her, she said, "My eyesight can't see the place they all went to very well." Smiling happily before delivering the good news that should have calmed the boy down, she added, "But your family and friends are safe in case you're not sure." Hearing the words from the girl who had just assured him that his comrades had survived the attack, Art was surprised to hear that they were all safe. Trying to hold back his tears, the guy felt some kind of calm and joyfully added they were safe. Unable to resist the rush of emotions and shedding tears, the boy joyfully mumbled, "Thank you, Sylvia, for the information." After the girl's message, the guy finally got over his anxiety and was able to work and go about his business in his free time, fencing or picking fruit for food together with the girl. Recalling the time we spent together and how he spent it, the boy said in his head, "Sylvia and I talked about different things when she wasn't preparing the portal. Those hours turned into days, and those days turned into weeks, until we spent every moment in each other's company. And although Sylvia never talked about her life, I slowly began to understand what kind of person this mysterious creature was." Continuing to think about his interlocutor and simultaneously his savior, Arthur mumbled in his head that Sylvia was the living embodiment of the phrase, "Don't judge a book by its cover." Recalling the moments of exceptional care when searching for food, Art mentally added, despite her appearance, she was kind, gentle, and patient. After finding a certain kind of berries and picking them in the cave, the girl brought them to the boy and said, "You've already had lunch, Arte. These fruits are particularly spicy and rarely grow elsewhere." After receiving one of the fruits that Sylvia had picked, the boy added in his head, "She reminds me of my mother in that she was also kind and gentle. But she scolded me a lot for those moments when I was wrong about something." Immediately after putting his hand to his head, the guy involuntarily remembered something he didn't want to. Art ran through his head, "I just remembered something unpleasant." Recalling the face of the leader of the bandits who attacked them in the canyon, surrounding them from all sides, Art mentally recalled the time when I showed open hatred for the bandits. Gritting his teeth as he recalled the face of the man who had brought so much grief to their family, Arthur said they deserved to die even worse, and if any of them survived. With a fearsome expression on his face, the boy said confidently, "Then I'm going to track down every single one of them who managed to survive and deal with the offenders myself." As soon as he said this, he noticed Sylvia's hand approaching him, after which he received a blow to the forehead and flew back from the rock on which he was meditating. When he came to after a short flight, the boy grabbed his forehead and exclaimed to the girl, "Hey, what was that just now?" Then, in response to the boy's question, Sylvia answered Art, "You may be right that these bandits deserve to die, but I decided not to save the life of the wizard you fell with for the same reason as he answered. Then why you?" Trying to quench Arthur's thirst for blood, the girl bowed her head and added, "But letting your heart be wrapped in hatred and revenge can only hurt you in the future." Continuing to look at the guy who was holding his forehead after the girl's admonition, he heard her add instead that he should continue to walk proudly forward in life. Putting her hand on the boy's shoulder, Sylvia added, "You will face many troubles, but do not let regrets, sadness, and anger corrode your mind. Learn from others and look to the future with a smile. Only then will you truly win." After explaining the horror of choosing the path of revenge, the girl began rubbing the guy's forehead where she had hit him and said, "I overdid it and slapped you too hard. I'm sorry you're still in pain." After receiving a question from his interlocutor in this lonely place, Art mentally delivered a lecture on morality and life by a figure who seemed to be the embodiment of evil, which struck me quite strongly. The next moment, noticing that the boy had lost his appetite for the fruit she had brought, she asked him why he was not eating the fruit. Something was wrong. After receiving a question from Sylvia, Art threw his arm behind his neck and smiled happily, saying that, "Oh no, I'm fine, don't worry." Immediately after this remark, paying attention to the girl's wound, he said worriedly, "Sylvia, your wound looks like it's getting worse and worse." Hearing the warning from her interlocutor, the young lady calmed the boy down and said, "Don't worry, kid, this wound fester from time to time." To which he replied in surprise that it was true. After finding out that the situation with the injury was not critical, Sylvia added, "I've been meaning to ask you something for a long time." And then Art, savoring the fruit, said, "I'm interested in you." Putting a hand to her chin, the young lady said thoughtfully, "As far as I remember, people usually awaken at the age of 12 or 13. But you have formed a core that is already capable of using more effective techniques than most full-fledged mages." He got a question from Sylvia, who was surprised by his skills, and the boy smeared fruit juice all over his face and said, "My parents told me I was a genius." Hearing that there was a genius in front of her, the girl leaned toward the boy and said, "Then maybe you can learn it." Hearing the question from the dark night, Art asked what exactly to learn. Noticing the interest in the guy's words, the girl got to her feet and confidently told me about absorbing mana while moving, and possibly during a battle if you are skilled enough. When Art heard what Sylvia had decided to teach him, he looked at his interlocutor in confusion and asked how you were going to do it. After hearing the question from the guy, Sylvia looked at her hand and said that people have too linear a mindset when it comes to mana. Just start with small, meaningless movements and work your way up from there. Hearing the main problems of mana mastery that existed in humans, Arthur said sadly, "Easier said than done." And then the girl answered him, "Mana animals learn to do it naturally, but since people usually wake up much later, their bodies are not able to perform such multitasking." Continuing to look at the boy she wanted to teach mana control to, she added, "Considering that the last fact does not apply to you. If you practice hard, you will succeed." After making several attempts to achieve the desired effect, Arthur clenched his hands into fists and confidently exclaimed, "Okay, then I'll do my best." Hearing that he would try hard to fulfill his task, Sylvia happily said what was to be expected from you and then laughed. As Art continued to train diligently, he said in his head that practicing this skill meant being able to fight effectively, while maintaining a steady internal flow of mana. Thus, continuing to wave the stick for some time to practice mana conservation in battle, Art began to feel that he was getting somewhere. After a while, feeling the changes in his body, the boy stopped waving the stick and looked at his hand and said, "This can't be happening." Realizing that he had succeeded in achieving the task, the boy looked back at his mentor and happily exclaimed, "Sylvia, I did it." Just as he was about to share his achievement with his mentor, he saw that she suddenly fell to the ground and a pool of blood began to form near her. Feeling that something was definitely wrong, the boy quickly went to her, scared, calling out Sylvia. Trying to somehow shout to the girl who had just fallen to the ground, Arthur shouted out to Sylvia in confusion what had happened. Approaching the girl who was lying on the ground, Art began to turn her around to put her on her back, shouting, "Sylvia, hold on!" As soon as she was on her back, the guy noticed that blood was flowing rapidly from her wound and asked why your wound was getting worse so quickly. After seeing the wound, which opened and began to bleed actively, Art also noticed a portal near him that the girl had been creating recently. Starting to realize what could have caused this situation, the guy nervously said, "This can't be right." Recalling all those moments of caring for him and trying to hide his poor health, Art explained why. Falling to his knees and bowing his head down in despair, Arthur said sadly to her, "It's getting worse and worse." Shifting his gaze from the portal to Sylvia, the guy added sadly, "She supports the portal and that's why her wound is getting worse." Bending his head over the body of the girl who had sacrificed herself, Arthur said she did it all for the sake of the... The next moment, after regaining consciousness, the girl opened her eyes and said, "Everything is fine, baby." Starting to shed tears after hearing Sylvia's words, Art said sadly how in such a place everything can be good when. Holding on to one of the girl's fingers, the boy shed tears of sadness and added, "When you die because of me." Recalling the moment after Sylvia created the portal and her words that everything was fine, Art mentally said, I cried longer than I can admit." Sitting next to the exhausted girl, I cried for the first time as the child I was on the outside. Noticing that the tears were no longer flowing so actively from his eyes, the girl asked if Art had calmed down a bit, and he replied, wiping his tears, "No." After hearing the answer, Sylvia said, holding her wound, "We don't have much time left together, and I wouldn't want you to blame yourself for that." Hearing his friend's request, the boy wiped tears from his eyes and said, "How can I not blame myself? You are sacrificing yourself so that I can meet my family." Hearing the boy's sad expressions, the girl said, "You are doing me a great favor by allowing me to leave this abandoned cave as soon as possible." And Sylvia responded. The next moment, noticing that her body began to crumble, she looked at her hand and said, "My name really doesn't fit my shape, does it?" After a few seconds, its form began to change, its shell slowly crumbling off and wings appearing on its back, freed from its armor. A few seconds later, the girl's entire shell crumbled off, and a white dragon appeared in front of Art. Having completed the transformation into her true form, the girl smiled happily and said, "Well, now I look more like Sylvia." When he realized who the girl he had spent so much time with was, Art muttered in confusion, "Sylvia, you're a dragon." In response to the boy's question, the girl happily exclaimed, "I guess I am what you people call a dragon, but we don't have much time for idle chatter now that I'm in this form." Once in her natural body, the girl said, "I must use my original form to complete this portal. But now that my disguise is gone, they will come soon," and then Art asked them who would come. After being told that someone would soon come for her, the girl said, holding her wound, "Now listen to me carefully, Arthur." Spreading her wings to pass a certain item to a friend, the girl said, "There are a few things I need to tell you before we part ways.